Hi, I'm Nick Powell, the opinion editor at City and State. Joining me on a very special edition of City and State TV is the former Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard. Thank you for joining us today, Ms. Gillard.
You're very welcome.
So I'm curious, I wanted to talk a little bit about your current position at Douceur. Why did you think that this company was the perfect fit for your kind of post-government career? And can you kind of explain to me what Douceur's overall mission is?
So the continuing thread of my life when I look back on it now, politics and the years before politics, has been this fascination with education and how it's the foundation stone of opportunity. So for me, post-politics, Douceur seemed a very natural fit, because what Douceur is trying to do is bring business education, the ability to start your own business, to have expertise in marketing and management, in business administration, to people in a really affordable way. So we've got a unique model, global faculty, more than 250 world leaders, Nobel Prize winners, business identities who are actually delivering the course content, which people do online. But we've also got close partnerships with industry, so people get to go and solve very practical problems. And so for me, coming out of politics, it actually seemed the solution to something I frequently heard when I was a policymaker, which was business people saying the education system doesn't work for us anymore. The graduates we get don't know anything about what we need to do to run a business. So I think we've closed that gap. And here in the US market, where I think cost is such a concern, we're able to do it at a very affordable price point. So for a bachelor degree, a University of Canberra qualification, one of the universities in the top 5% in the world, that will cost $15,000. You can do that qualification in 3 years or as little as 18 months, depending on how hard you go at it. And a master's qualification in business administration, once again from the University of Canberra, for a total price of $25,000. So given what I've heard in the US market...
That's eminently affordable.
Yes, it's a whole different level of pricing from some of the things that people are asked to do and pay for.
Now, how do you said you have global partnerships, so how do you determine where around the world to target these partnerships? Is it a matter of visiting first and kind of doing fact-finding missions and then you kind of go from there, or what's that process like?
Yeah, it's really a horses for courses kind of thing. Here in the US market, where I think Australia is viewed so fondly and favourably, it made sense to offer our Australian qualifications, because I think employers will look at something like a University of Canberra degree. It's from our national capital, our Washington equivalent, and they will say, well, that's a good quality qualification to have. In other parts of the world, we will do partnerships with universities. And then a lot of what we do has a philanthropic side. So there is the Douceur I've just described to you, but that Douceur goes to support philanthropic work in Africa, where we're trying to bring the benefits of a better school education to students in Africa, more learning materials. We're a big publisher of books for African school students. And we also over time want to offer our Bachelor of Entrepreneurship on a philanthropic basis into Africa, because so many of the nations there are suffering because their real economy needs to grow. And so the more people have the skills of entrepreneurship, then the bigger difference they'll be able to make.
That's very interesting. I'm curious, because you mentioned talking to people in this country about our public education system and kind of the gaps there. In this city in particular, there's kind of a very fraught debate between charter schools, which are privately funded, and the public education system. And it was intended to be collaborative, but it has never quite worked out that way. I'm curious, is kind of the overall mission of Douceur intended to supplement the public university system, public education, or kind of moving towards, I guess, a time when we're going to replace that?
I think it's certainly to complement. I mean, we work in partnership with a public provider. The University of Canberra is a public university. Indeed, in Australia, almost all the universities are public universities. We've got a slightly differently constructed system. My sense about the future of universities is we're in the midst of the biggest change that universities have seen in the 1,000 years that something called a university has existed. I mean, for all of that 1,000 years, a university had to be a physical place. The learning happened where the professors were and the library was and all the rest of it. And I think we're now going to see a whole lot of diversification, and there will always be places that people want to go to. There will always be young people who want a college experience. It's part of becoming an adult. What you learn about managing yourself and meeting people like you at college is as important as the academic content. It's sort of a stage of life. But there will also be, you know, career switchers, career movers, people who want to get that next promotion at work. They're already busy, they're already career focused, they may already have a couple of kids for whom the online model like Dessert is the solution.
Very interesting. I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about one of the pieces of legislation that you passed as Prime Minister. The carbon tax is something that I took kind of a keen interest in, mainly because I don't think it would have any prayer of even getting a vote in the kind of political climate in our Congress right now. So I guess my question is, with the debate over the carbon tax and kind of global warming at large, is it as fraught as it is here, where there's, you know, a certain political party that outright denies popular science and the concept of global warming in general? Was that a difficult case to make when you were trying to get that passed?
Yes, hugely difficult, and our politics on this does mirror yours. There are always similarities between US and Australian politics, and there are some differences, but on this we followed, I would say unfortunately, the kind of hyperpartisanship that there's been in the US debate. So in our conservative side of politics, there is quite a number of people who are just simply deniers of the science. Then there are others who pay some lip service to the science but pretend that we are going to be able to get, you know, ongoing emissions reductions some other way than putting a price on carbon, even though all of the world's statist economists would tell you pricing something like carbon is the best way of reducing it. So this has been a hugely fraught political debate. There was probably no more controversial issue when I was Prime Minister than this issue. The incoming Conservative government did repeal the legislation that priced carbon. Since then, the Prime Ministership has changed, and interestingly, the new Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, has, across his political career, been personally committed to pricing carbon, but now seems to have adopted the broad philosophy of his political party, which is still opposed to pricing carbon.
Interesting. Another thing that you became kind of globally famous for was your speech on misogyny, and it was kind of seen as this feminist outcry. I had the opportunity to watch the speech, as many did. This kind of became a viral sensation. I'm curious, were you surprised that it got picked up as widely as it did? And as kind of a supplement to that question, I wonder if, you know, the kind of messaging in that speech, if you can see some kind of similarities with how the media has covered Hillary Clinton and Carly Fiorina and some of our female presidential candidates in this campaign cycle.
Well, that's a very good set of questions, and I'd have to confess I was astonished at the reaction to the speech. I felt when I gave it, and it was given essentially off the cuff, I felt when I gave it that it was a powerful speech. I mean, the House of Representatives in Australia, it's truly a bear pit. I mean, we've taken the UK Westminster system and knocked all of the politeness out of it, and it really is, you know, it can be a fair old brawl in the House of Parliament. Sure. And so in that environment, I knew that it had been a powerful speech. The opposition literally went from, with their heads up, screaming abuse at me to dropping their heads, and I knew that meant it was having an effect. But I didn't have any sense of how it was resonating in the outside world. I mean, so little did I sense it that when I finished the speech, I turned back to my deputy leader, a man called Wayne Swan, and said, "Oh, I'll have to sit here for the rest of this debate now. I'm going to get some correspondence run in, so I've got something to do while I'm sitting here." And he had this quite odd look on his face and said, "You know, you can hardly give the I accuse speech and then settle down and do your correspondence." And I thought, well, you know, that's that's a little bit odd from Wayne. So that was the first inkling that maybe there was something else going on here. And by the time I got back to my office, it was already sort of, going out around the world. And now I travel very extensively, and wherever I go, women, cross a street to talk to me about that speech. As for the comparisons with American politics, I think a lot of people who watched my speech thought, this is something about Australia, this is something about a masculine culture in Australia, a sort of macho approach to life. I don't think it is. I think this is a global issue about women and leadership, and so much so that in fact some of the most sexist insults hurled at me when I was Prime Minister had actually originally been hurled at Hillary Clinton when she last ran for the nomination from the Democrats. So it just goes to show there's this undercurrent in all of our politics, and as a nation, Australia, the US, around the world, we all need to make more of an effort to truly equalise the treatment of female leaders, who should not be beyond criticism, but the criticism should be about their policies and leadership capacity, not based on gender.
Sure. Another issue that's been very kind of hotly debated in the campaign cycle is immigration. And I know the nature of our immigration problem is a little bit different than what you were dealing with in Australia. I was wondering if you can kind of explain the nuances between the two. And I also know that there's a migrant crisis that kind of factors in there. Can you?
Yes. Well, the key difference, it seems to me, to start with, is geography. I mean, we don't have land borders. We don't know what it's like to have a land border. As my great Labor predecessor, Paul Keating, was fond of saying, when God gave out the continents, not too many people got a whole one to themselves, but we got a whole continent. So, we don't know what it's like to manage a land border. We consequently have been able to have a very tightly regulated immigration system. And so we don't have the sorts of issues that you have here with undocumented workers who have actually made this country their home for a long period of time but really don't have legal status. We don't have that problem. And we are a nation that still has a very sizable migration program, including a sizable refugee intake. In our politics, what becomes very contested is when we get unauthorised arrivals by boat. Asylum seekers try and get across the water, particularly between Indonesia and Australia, and land unauthorised. That, worries Australians who want to see a managed migration program. It's also deeply concerning from a humanitarian perspective, because literally thousands of people have died trying to make that journey. It might look like a narrow stretch of water when you look at it on the map, but it's an incredibly dangerous stretch of water. So we've got a quite tough-minded set of policies to deter people from trying those boat journeys, whilst on the other hand we continue to take refugees through an authorised program, and certainly my political party has stood over time for increasing that intake.
That's very interesting. To kind of wrap up, I wanted to ask you about Australia's gun control laws, which are globally hailed as some of the toughest. We obviously are on the heels of a national tragedy with a mass shooting in Oregon. And when tragedies like this happen, it tends to be very politicized, and you hear people calling for gun control that usually falls short of any actual concrete legislation. So I'm curious, how would you frame the debate about gun control if you were trying to make the case for tougher gun laws, not just here, but in Australia, for instance?
Well, I would simply say our experience shows that it works. Now, it's not perfect. It would be naive to say no one has been killed by a gun in Australia since we adopted our new laws. Indeed, quite recently, a radicalised young man shot a police officer. But those incidents are rare in Australia, and we have not had a mass casualty shooting event since we adopted these rigorous gun laws. And they are very rigorous. They do mean that the only people who have access to guns are farmers who need them for vermin control and culling stock and very practical things on the land. And people who are sporting shooters, but they need to be registered, and their weapons need to be kept under lock and key at their sporting shooting club. So people do not have weapons at home. It's not, therefore we don't have incidents where 5 and 6 year olds have picked up guns and accidentally shot another child or any of those kinds of things. So I would simply say in the US, the evidence, it seems to me, is in, and the evidence is that it cuts gun crime and cuts the number of people who die as a result of the use of weapons. Human beings, I fear, will always find a way to harm another human being. I think tragically somehow that's in us as a species. But the truth is, less harm can be done if people have got access to less sophisticated weaponry. And the difference between someone setting out to attack others with a knife or with a very high-powered weapon, there is a difference in the amount of damage they will do. Absolutely. So both are absolutely wrong, but there's a difference in the number of people who will be harmed. And that's been our experience, that minimising the guns has minimised the number of people who get harmed.
Absolutely. Well, former Prime Minister Julia Gillard, thank you for joining us today on City and State TV.
Thank you very much.